Good morning again. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great honor, great privilege, and also huge pleasure to be talking about literary translation and translated books here to you and to everybody who is listening and watching us on the internet. A few years ago, I was researching the private archives of Stanisław Barańczak, a Polish poet and translator who was a professor at Harvard University. My aim then was to find his correspondence with another Polish poet and translator, the Nobel laureate Czesław Miłosz. Their letters, which will hopefully be published rather soon, are fascinating and full of translation matters. But it turned out that a true treasure trove was waiting for me patiently in another box. I think this may be of interest, Barańczak's widow Anna said one morning, handing me a folder which contained her husband's correspondence with the Irish Nobel laureate Seamus Heaney, also a poet and an outstanding translator. Barańczak was Heaney's translator into Polish. The Irishman visited Poland on several occasions. I had the pleasure of meeting him and the honor of being the translator of his essays and some of his poems as well. So the material immediately seemed interesting indeed. But when I started reading, I realized that what I have in my hands was an absolutely unique document. It was a record of the two translators, poet-translators, collaborative work on another poet-translator's masterpiece, the cycle of 19 laments by Jan Kochanowski, the Polish 16th century author. Written in 1518, after the untimely death of the poet's infant daughter, the laments are considered a gem of Polish language, as well as of early modern European literature. Of course, I knew this translation, published in 1995 to a relatively wide acclaim. If you come from one of the less widely used languages, you are sure to know about such translations, the canonical works of your literature made available to international audiences thanks to the translation into English. I knew it. But I must admit, it never crossed my mind that a record of this extraordinary joint venture existed at all. And now, suddenly, it was there, in front of me. What I was reading was not simply a contextual material shedding light on the collaboration of Barańczak and Heaney, but the collaboration materialized. A detailed documentation of the work, a record of the process of interpretation, discussion, rendition, commentary, revision, fine-tuning of the text, as well as of some stages of the publication process and the initial phase of the reception of the book. The becoming of a translation, something that is normally invisible, hidden. It was there, reenacted in front of my eyes. Barańczak and Heaney met at Harvard in the late 1980s. They both taught there, Barańczak on a permanent basis. Heaney was a visiting professor of poetry, toing and froing between Boston and Dublin. One afternoon in April 1993, while they were talking at the Barańczaks, together with Claire Kavanagh, another translator, the topic of elegies for children cropped up, and Kochanowski's cycle was mentioned, along Ben Jonson's To My First Son, and Heaney's own poem, Midterm Break. And that was the beginning of this extraordinary translation journey, the first of many chance meetings and serendipities on its way. Already a couple of days later, Barańczak sent Heaney his translations of 4 laments, complete, rhyming, rhythmical, ready. And Heaney instantly felt interested, but it seems that he only found time to return to this endeavor a year later, and when he did, the journey took speed. At the beginning, the two translators met to discuss the text at Harvard's Widen's Library, or over a pint of Guinness in an Irish pub in Boston. And of course, there are hardly any traces of these conversations in the archive. But once the semester ended and Heaney went back to Dublin, they continued the conversation by means of fax. Fax messages, because early 1990s, this was still a pre-email era, and it's precisely this technical circumstance that we owe the existence of this precious correspondence to. And this technical circumstance makes it so fascinating and moving as well. Faxes combined the materiality of a written letter. So, for example, I could see Heaney's beautiful handwriting just there in front of me on the table. But it combines the materiality of a letter with the immediacy of email exchange. And they were sent across a 6-hour time divide, by the way. These letters gave us access to the physical form of the communication between the two translators and to the real time and pace of the creative process. In some cases, the messages crossed the Atlantic a couple of times a day. And I have loads of fascinating and lovely stories about how I was trying to put these letters in order to put them in chronological sequence. So, had it not been for the distance and the communication method, all these discussions over the details and renditions and the meticulous process of negotiating versions would have been lost forever, as these things usually are. The impermanent fax paper I was touching and the photosensitive print that vanishes when exposed to light may actually serve as a metaphor for the fragile nature of any documentation of the work involved in making a translated book see the light of the day and find their way to the hands of the readers. Translators' archives are in general extremely rare and far between. They tend to be taken proper care of only if a translator happens to be also a celebrated writer. Well, this actually was the case, but still this archive is hidden and not available to researchers. In the majority of cases, translators fail to perceive their papers are valuable. Who would care is the regular answer to the question why they don't keep their notes or working materials. There are many reasons behind it. The most central one is systemic and ideological. Translators are supposed to be neutral go-betweens, invisible mediators, who ideally should leave no traces, and archives are sets of traces. Also, translation, even literary translation, is often perceived and treated as a commodity rather than creative work. So no or little value is attached to the process of its becoming, as long as it is kept smooth and cheap. Sketches done by painters enjoy the status of legitimate art creations. Similarly, drafts of poems or writers' notebooks. Early versions of translations don't. There are also reasons related to the concept of error and perfection in the highly prescriptive critical discourse around translation. There's the famous adage that translation is visible only if faulty. Why should translators keep and share imperfect versions which may carry their mistakes, as if there were perfect versions and everlasting solutions in any translation? There are also personal or practical considerations, and that's one of the reasons why the Barańczak-Heaney correspondence is still hidden. One has to organize one's papers or files, and it takes time, a lot of effort, and costs money. Similar problems pertain to archives of publishers and literary journals, as well as to archives of various institutions supporting translation and translators. They produce loads of correspondence, contracts, minutes of meetings that may seem irrelevant outside their immediate context. But if kept and made available, as they should be, They disclose invaluable information on the structure of literary translation field and the translation market. The journey of any translated book embarks on when it leaves the desk of its creators. The archives give us access to the inner structure of literary culture and let us understand how texts become books on both literary and marketing levels. Coming back to the case I am talking about, the publishers chosen for the Laments were finally very prestigious Faber in London and Farrar, Straus and Giroux in New York City. But other options were also considered by the translators. The letters outlining the publication strategy for the Kochanowski book disclose the difference between the market position of the world-famous Seamus and the relatively obscure Stanisław. Correspondence with editors, and they were Christopher Reed in Faber and Jonathan Galassi in New York, in Farrar Straus. It sheds light on the role in shaping the final version of the published book, as well as making a testimonial to the high expertise, engagements, and literary talents. Publishers' archives hold an invaluable documentation of the work of people without whose effort and talent no translated book will ever find its way to the readers. All those experts who are even more invisible than translators are. Editors, editorial assistants, graphic designers, marketing and sales staff, agents, you name them. None of these stages of a translated book's journey is purely technical and void of cultural significance. At all of these stages, creative effort of many people is engaged. Nothing here happens in a void. Each step of this process is important for the final shape the book takes, as well as for the study, academic like mine, of the aesthetical, ethical, ideological, or political impact of translated literature. So, the letters of Barańczak and Heaney gave me access to the process of becoming of translation on the poetic level. I could trace the actual changes and corrections, study the commentaries and thoughts on style and language of the original and the translation. I could also study the art of collaborative translation, witness the meeting of two creative minds, their mutual inspiration, and understand the contribution each of the poets made to the final version of the translation. The letters gave me insight to the politics of translation as well, the social and commercial side of the collaborative project. They uncovered the play of power and prestige behind the translation work, as well as the complex institutional structure of the journey this translated book made. But there was one more striking aspect of these letters, both central and under-researched. I would call it the human factor in literary translation, collaborative or not, for that matter. The interpersonal, emotional side of the translatorial undertaking. Well, translating literature certainly is an emotional job, and one that has to do with relationships. Perhaps more often than not, translators work as soloists, but they never work alone in a void. In one of the letters in the collection, this time addressed to another translator, not Barańczak, Heaney returns to the afternoon at the Barańczaks in April 1993, when the idea of translating the Laments first took shape. And he writes about what he called the high-octane conversation, which filled him with elation and brought a swift, real rush of poetic excitement. Now you'll have a sample of Heaney's letter-writing style. Such interest and engagement, he says, only come to me when the poetry-writing appetite itself is wakened. And waken it did, when I started in earnest to read the Barańczak versions. And he goes on. Since I first met him 12 or 13 years ago, our friendship was deepened, our freedom together has developed, and our sense of each other has been well and truly tuned. It is because of this intimacy and trust that his first translation of my work, and now the Träne, which is the title of the Laments, had gone ahead so rewardingly. I don't think I appreciated the meaning of these phrases at first. Only later, when I started thinking about their significance for understanding translation history and for my own work in translation and in academia, did I realize that these letters, printed in vanishing ink on the crumbling fax paper, I discovered largely by chance. On top of being a source of knowledge on how poems are translated, edited, and published, was also a rare and beautiful document of a friendship. Emotions usually vanish from historical or critical discourse. It is not often that they are taken into consideration in the description of the literary field. Here they were central. The translation of Laments by Jan Kochanowski would not happen. This book's journey would never even start without the friendship that united its creators. It made me think of all the translation journeys I took, which started with a friendship, and of those which ended with a friendship. And these thoughts made me very happy. Thank you very much.